So we're going to look at the next 2 pages of the Livy text, which we've already read together in class. But if you missed anything while we were going through it, you can listen to this video and add it to your notes. So the subject in this first sentence is advocati, which means the advocates or the supporters, not official lawyers probably, but general supporters. So the supporters of the girl, that is Virginia, the supporters of Virginia, cum dixissent, so you've got cum plus subjunctive, pluperfect subjunctive there, meaning when something had happened. So when they had said, and we now go into indirect statement. So the subject, the person doing the action in the indirect statement, goes into the accusative. So that's Virginium. And then the verb goes into the infinitive, and that's ab esse. So when they had said that Virginius was absent, rei publicae causa, for the sake of the state, or for the sake of the republic. Okay? Because this is a relatively common idiom in Latin, that causa in the ablative case plus genitive means for the sake of something. So rei publicae causa means for the sake of the republic. And then we stay in indirect statement, so accusatives and infinitives. So they also, and Virginius is still the subject. So they said that Virginius ad futurum, which is short for ad futurum esse, he would be present. Bidua, now biduum means a period of 2 days. And here it's in the ablative case because this is time within which. So they said that Virginius would be present within 2 days if nuntiatum sit, if it were announced, i.e. if the situation were announced to him, that's the dative singular of the pronoun is ea id, so he would be present within 2 days if it were announced to him. And they said that, so we're still in indirect statement, so we have another infinitive, which is esse. So they said that it was iniquum, unfair or unjust, that an absent person, absentem, dimicare, struggle or fight or contend, de liberis, about his children. So it was unfair for a man who was away to have to fight a lawsuit about his children. Okay, and so when they had said all of that, then postulant, they demand, or they ask, ut, that, and then because this is an indirect command, we have ut plus subjunctive. They ask that deferat, that he postpone or defer, and the subject is he, which refers to Appius. So they ask that he postpone the matter, rem, that's the object, integram, untouched. So nothing should happen to the case, just leave it alone, postpone the matter untouched, in adventum, literally into the arrival, or we would say until the arrival of the father, patris. And then we stay in indirect command because we've got another subjunctive, det. So they also ask him to grant or to give, det, present subjunctive of dare, they ask him to give And then we have this very technical legal phrase, vindicias secundum libertatem. That means rights according to liberty. Secundum is nothing to do with second. It means according to when it's followed by accusative. So they asked him to grant rights according to liberty. Lege ab ipso lata, by the law, ablative case, by the law, brought or created, lata, this is the PPP, perfect passive participle, from fero, to bring. So by the law, brought by himself. So in other words, he should allow Virginia to be treated as a free woman until the trial, because that's what the law states, and the law is one which Appius himself introduced, because he's one of these decemvirs who are creating a legal code for Rome. So he should do those things. He should postpone the matter, and he should grant her this liberty. And then there are some things he should not do. Neu, now this is like neck, but in a subjunctive construction. So, and he should not patiatur, literally he should not suffer, and it has really the meaning he should not allow, which is actually something you find in old-fashioned English. You know, I will not suffer you to do something, means I will not allow you to do something. So he should not allow a virginem adultam, a grown maiden, a grown unmarried woman, to adire, literally to go into, to enter into, periculum famae, danger of reputation, priusquam, before, periculum libertatis, danger of liberty. In other words, he should not allow her reputation to suffer until she actually loses her liberty. So until the case is decided, her reputation should not suffer. And of course, if she goes home with Marcus, you know, everyone will assume that she is in fact a slave. And that's not fair, because she has not yet been, this has not yet been decided by the court. And we also mentioned in class, adultam, you know, she's a grown maiden. Why does Livy mention, why does he include this word adultam? Possibly to emphasize the fact that Virginia is in particular danger because she is grown up to some extent. She's going through puberty or gone through puberty, which might make her an object of sexual desire, and therefore it's particularly dangerous for her to be treated as a slave. Because if she's a slave, she doesn't have any rights, really. So she becomes particularly vulnerable to sexual abuse, basically. That might well be the reason why Livy includes adultam there. Okay, let's go on then. So now this is a very, very long and challenging sentence. But don't worry, there aren't very many of those. So Appius is the subject. I'm going to need to do some annotations here to try and make it as clear as I can. So Appius is in the nominative case. He's the subject. And then the first main verb is praefatur. That means to say something before something else. So he says before his decretum, he says before his decision, his decree, and he says that. So we're going into an indirect statement, which would have an accusative and an infinitive. You know, he says that something is the case. And the accusative is legen. Okay, and the infinitive is declarare. Okay, so that's the basic structure of the sentence. So Appius says before his decree that the law, and the law is also described by eam ipsam, so he says that that law itself, and then we have this phrase, quam, which the friends of Virginius, amici Vergini, so Vergini here is genitive case, and amici is another subject, so nominative case. So that law itself, which the friends of Virginius praetendant, that's our verb, so offer for their claim, postulationi suae, that's dative case. So that very law which Virginius's friends offer for their claim, right, this very law shows or declares quam, how much he favors, so Appius is the subject of faveret, favors liberty. Right, this verb favere takes dative, so that's why libertati is in the dative case. Okay, so in other words, Appius is saying, look, you can tell that I am a big fan of liberty because I introduced this law, right? You can see because I introduced this law, I must be someone who supports liberty. But then, of course, he's going to say that there are complications in this particular case. Okay? And so that starts to come in with this word ceterum. Okay? So we'll now move on to this next bit. Okay? So ceterum has nothing to do with ceteri, meaning the others. It means but. Okay? So, and now we're still in indirect statement, right? So he said that in this way, ita, or I think the idea is something like only in this way, would there be, there's our next infinitive, future infinitive of the verb to be, only this way would there be a firmum praesidium, a firm protection for liberty. So again, libertati is dative. Only in this way would there be a firm protection for liberty in ea, in it, right? And ea here is referring to the law. Right. So there would only be a firm protection for liberty in this law. Si variet, if it varied, nec causis nec personis, neither by cases nor by persons. In other words, this law, which he apparently designed to protect liberty, can only do that if it is used or applied in the same way for everyone, right? So he's saying, you know, I would love to make an exception for Virginia, but I'm afraid, you know, it has to be, the law has to be consistent. You know, he's being very, he's lying, really. He's not being truthful in this passage. Okay, and then he says, in aliis. Now, literally, that just means in others. I think the idea is in the case of other people. Okay, so an enim means for, in the sense of introducing an explanation. So for in other cases, in aliis, right, in the case of others, qui adserantur in libertate, literally who are claimed into liberty. in other words, who are claimed as free, quia quivis, because anyone is able, possit, to act by law, ageret lege, in other words, to bring a legal case to court, because anyone is able to do that. Id, that thing, that request, esse juris, is of the law. In other words, it is legal. Okay. But in ea, in the case of her, quae sit, who is in manu patris, in the hand of her father, i.e. under her father's authority, okay, there is esse, and we still have infinitives because we are in indirect statement. There is no one else, neminem alium, to whom, cui, dative of qui, to whom the master, dominus, could yield, or should yield, cedat, by possession, possessione, or in terms of possession. Okay. So the point is, if you had an adult man come to court and say, I'm being called a slave, but actually I'm free, the court could just say, okay, go home, we'll treat you as a free man for now, and then when the court case happens, we'll decide your future. But Appius is saying it's not so simple for Virginia because she is an unmarried woman. So the problem is, if she's not a slave, who can she go home with? She can't go home with her father because he is away. He's not in Rome. She also can't go home with her husband because she doesn't have one. She has a fiancé, but that doesn't really count. And therefore, unfortunately, in this situation, she will have to go home with her supposed master, the dominus. Now, Appius is really being very sneaky here and perhaps acting illegally, and we'll see soon that this causes a major outcry among the Romans, this decision. Okay, so let's go on to the end of the page there. We're still in indirect statement, so we still have infinitives. So he said that placere, it was pleasing, or in a legal context, it was decreed. And in fact, we also have itaque, which means and so. So, and so, he said that it was decreed that the father, patrem, be summoned, arcesiri. This is the passive infinitive from arcesso, which means I summon someone. So it was decreed for the father to be summoned. And meanwhile, inter ea, for the adsertorem, the claimant, non facere iactura. Now, a iactura is a noun connected to iacere, to throw. So it's a noun that means a throwing or a throwing away. So it was decreed for the claimant not to make a throwing away of his law, in other words, of his claim. So it was decreed that the claimant should not abandon his claim. I think that's the point of facere iactura. He should not give up his claim. But that, that's the meaning of queen, but that he should lead the girl, ducat puellam, in other words, he should take the girl away, and que, he should promise, promittat, and then sistendam is going with puellam, literally promise her to be brought. in other words, he should promise that she would be brought. In aventum, upon the arrival of him, eius, genitive of is eaid, upon the arrival of him, qui dicatur, who was called pater, her father. So in other words, Marcus, the claimant, the man who is claiming that Virginia is his slave, should take her home and promise to bring her back to the court once the father arrives. And as we will see in the next section, this decision by Appius is going to create a lot of unhappiness and uproar among the Roman people.